Highline Heritage Museum. I'm Charlotte, and I'm happy to see all of you guys here. I just would like to take a moment to do our land acknowledgement real quick. So let's please think in honor of those who have preceded us, including the people of the Duwamish, Squamish, Nisqually, and Muckleshoot tribes. Now, we do this at every event. We do this at field trips. We always do this. And this is not just so we can check a box, like, yep, there's our land acknowledgement. It's because we really believe in this. This is our values. This is Highline Heritage Museum. With that being said, are you guys excited to hear some good stories tonight? Awesome. I would like to introduce Miss Peggy to come on up. And she will introduce the rest of what's going on tonight.
So I have to say, Miss Peggy brought back a quick memory when I had an interesting working environment, and my nickname, of course you all know Sesame Street, was Miss Piggy. And I was the boss, but it was said with affection, and so I always remember that. So welcome tonight to 7 Stories, 7 Storytellers, 7 Stories in 7 minutes. And it's just been such a pleasure to be associated with this organization and the group and our community for over 5 years for me, but I know we've been here longer. I just wanted to briefly talk about what stories are, because if you go back in human history, we have painted on cave walls, we've etched in pictographs, and over time developed language and other methods of telling our stories. And then we got the alphabet, and there are so many different alphabets in the world, and the printing press, which meant everybody could have the opportunity to read. You didn't have to be a monk with parchment or a highly educated person. But at the core of all of that is our stories. And the thing I really like 7 Stories in Burien is it gives us a chance as neighbors and members of our community to share things from our lives. And it can be any kind of story. It can be something that's funny, poignant, whatever, but it's real, and the people listening to you relate to that because we all have our stories. That's my intro to tonight. However, we have some housekeeping matters. The first one is we do have, we have a sign-up sheet at the front desk. If you have already signed up in the past and given us your email, you do not need to fill out the sign-up sheet. But if you're new to 7 Stories, or if you just want to make sure that you are on our email list or contact list, please sign up on that sheet because that's how we can reach out to you. Next, be sure and turn off your telephone. And I always hated asking for money, but I don't mind telling you that 7 Stories needs your support. We're a totally volunteer organization. We have some grant funding, but it does not go very far. And so no matter what you have, if you want to share a little bit of it, please put it in the basket. And we absolutely appreciate anything you can give. We appreciate your being here more, but the little bit helps. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Peggy, and welcome to Burien 7 Stories. My name is Fred, and I'll be guiding you through tonight's 7 Storytellers. First of all, we have some new storytellers tonight, so make sure that as they come up, whether they are someone you've seen before or not, please give them a smile, wave, anything that'll make them feel comfortable. And if they're telling a funny story, feel free to laugh. If they're saying something sad, please don't laugh. Just enjoy yourselves tonight because we have 7 really dynamic stories. I would have to say that this Animal Tales theme is the most popular theme we've ever had. We had like 13 different people sign up, so we're going to continue this into next month. We're going to do the 7 stories tonight, and then the remaining ones that have signed up, we're going to tell next month along with the other theme, and so it'll be Animal Tales for a while. A couple things that I also want to mention. There is a microphone. The microphone has a cord, so please be careful as you're walking up to tell your story. Also, we want to hear your story. And so if you're telling your story, please speak directly into the microphone. I know sometimes people will wander or they'll kind of move back, and then it's much harder for people in the back to hear. If you are sitting in the back or in the front and you can't hear, feel free to say, I can't hear. And then that way the person that's on the microphone will know that they need to get closer to the microphone again. I can help adjust the microphone if you need support with that as you come up to tell your story. A couple more things I want to mention. Of course, huge thanks to Highline Heritage Museum. This is an incredible resource in our community. If you haven't been here or if you're not a member, please consider a membership. You know, we have a family membership, which is a really good deal, and then you can come here and enjoy it. There are rotating exhibits, and there's also some things that you see every time you come. They also have a radio program, which is really dynamic, where they do interviews with local people of note. And so it's just an incredible resource. So please come back and support the museum. Big thanks to the Burien Arts Association, who is our fiscal sponsor, and the Burien Culture Hub, who helps to make sure that we are doing what we need to get done. South King Media is here tonight, and they are recording this. They are live streaming it on their Facebook page. And so if you want to go back and look at the stories again, you can go to the B-Town blog page on Facebook and watch it again and again and again. So big thanks to South King Media. If you want to follow us, obviously sign up for our mailing list and we'll send you an email, but you can also go on Meetup and search for 7 Stories, or go to burienculturehub.org/7stories, where you can both sign up to tell a story or read fun things about what's in the future. Just so you know, I did mention next month we're going to have more animal tales. Our actual theme next month is hidden truths, and so we'll have a couple of those in there too. Maybe some of the animal tales will have some hidden truths in them. I don't know. We'll see. Yeah, we're going to get started tonight with Penny Tetter, who retired from Boeing and has been a long-time Burien resident. And come on up.
As he said, my name is Penny Tetter, longtime resident of Burien. I'm originally from Pacific County, South Bend, Washington, a very tiny little town. If you're going down to the ocean, you don't want to take I-5. You turn off in Mathison and go through Raymond, and the next town is South Bend. We're known as the oyster capital of the world. So when I was, this is a story of a love story of Penny and her ducks. When I was about 9 or 10, in those small towns, I don't know if any of you remember the horrible little carnivals that used to come through, these cheap little carnivals. So we went to this carnival, and one of the things you could do to win something was if you threw a nickel on a platter on a little saucer, you'd win a baby duck, little tiny chick. So can you imagine if they tried to do that today at a carnival? Anyway, so I won a little duck, brought him home, and we put him in a cardboard box on the side of the house, and we put a light on a cord, hung it through the box, gave him some hay and some food and some water. And then my brother said, oh, we don't want him to be lonesome. See, he went back to the carnival and had another one. And so now I named the first one Donald, for Donald Duck, of course. The second one was Ronald. So then I had Ronnie and Donnie. So I spent all of my free time with those ducks. They're such wonderful pets. They grew up very fast. And as I had this little red coat that I wore to school, and when I'd get off the bus, I'd walk up a steep hill, and they could see my red coat coming, and they'd run to meet me. So we had some wonderful times together. So then, and I guess when I think about it, I was, just a young man, but I probably was quite a novelty around town. So one time we were about a block away from a motel, And what I would do is, the ducks would like to get into the dirt and pick around with eat bugs and stuff. So I was laying on my side on the grass at this motel, and I had my back to the street. And one of the tourists that came through was quite concerned. So we went up to the office, and he said, I don't know what's going on here, but there's a little girl laying on a lawn. And so she came out to look, and she said, oh, that's just Penny and her ducks. Yeah, sure. So anyway, I had this bright idea one day that, how much ducks like water, and we had a little, just a little ditch in the back of our yard, not much water. And I knew there was a pond up at the courthouse, which was about 3 blocks away. So they followed me up there and to the pond, and I picked them up and threw them in the pond. And of course, they were just delighted. And I got them out the first day and maybe the second day. But after that, they found their way up there and stayed there all day, of course. So then one day, this was a thing during the summer, my dad was telling me at dinner time, he says, I heard from Mr. Myers, the gardener up at the courthouse, and he says, those ducks are going to have to go because they're eating all my new bedding plants. They took it. So anyway, I didn't think much about it, but the following Monday when I went to school, I came home and there's no ducks to meet me. So I went in the house and I said to Mom, where's Ronnie and Donnie? And she wouldn't look at me. And she said, well, your dad and Mr. Myers got him out of the pond with some long poles and took him out to Menlo to a farm. So I was devastated. I said, I didn't even get to say goodbye. And of course, they knew that would be tough. So in a week or so, my dad took me out to a farm in Menlo, and I wore my little red coat, got out of the truck and walked up to the edge of this pond, and about 30 or 40 white ducks all ran to meet me. And of course, I didn't know which ones were I am Johnny. But I was happy to know that they had a lot of companions. So now, the courthouse, of course, is still there. The pond is still there. And guess what? It's filled with ducks.
Thank you, Penny. We had chickens for a while, and when we had 9 chickens, and when we had to get rid of them, I also was like, oh, we're going to take them to the farm, and I told my kids, go visit them, and it's all going to be good, and we never went to the farm. The kids were upset for a day, and then they were like, no, we don't want to go up to Everett to visit the chickens. The chickens were great with kids, though. They're really good with kids. The ducks scared me when I was little. We had a duck pond, and they would chase me around. I didn't like it. So you did better than I with the ducks. Up next, we have Don West. Don has told stories here before, and he reminds us, if you marry into a family with a few colorful characters, the stories write themselves. So, Don.
And I promise this is 30 seconds, but don't start the clock yet, because when I heard the commemoration, acknowledgement of the indigenous roots of ownership of this land, it reminded me of something that I observed recently that shows me how even this much later, indigenous people are not only here, but still working for justice. At the end of January, I was at the Wisen, Washington Immigrant Services Network rally at the state capitol, 500 people that are an incredible place. And in the crowd, I noticed there were a fair number of indigenous people and supporting refugees and immigrants. And several of them that were carrying signs that for some reason it had never clicked before and I never thought of it, made a lot of sense. And it also was sort of a light moment in dark days. And they were convinced from their perspective that you can't be illegal on stolen land. so it makes sense. Anyway, as far as today, my story is about a couple different kinds of animal tales. And I hope you'll see that at the end. Talked about my wife's family. When I got married almost 48 years ago, I didn't inherit, I acquired some family members who were characters. One of them is Carolyn called him Uncle Pete. Pete was Carolyn's father, Vernon's cousin, but he was just always Uncle Pete. Pete was this irrepressible person all his life who just charged into things, didn't think, got it overextended, got in trouble, and everyone just loved him. He was the kind of guy who would give you the shirt off his back, and in fact, there's another story about a time when he did just that. Everyone loved him, but they got frustrated with him. Well, Pete and Vernon spent close to 50 years together as not just cousins, but best friends. And they spent a huge amount of time hunting and fishing and hiking and camping and riding horseback and stuff out in the California, in the Sierra Nevada, in the desert, just all through California. They loved being out together. So they established a pattern where Pete was always irrepressible and had to get going on the day, and he would wake up early and get going, and he would start the fire and get the coffee going and get the bacon going and the eggs, and Vernon would be asleep. And as Vernon woke up, he would hear the fire crackling, and then he would hear the sizzle of the bacon, and he'd smell the coffee, and he'd gradually wake up, and he'd get up and be ready to eat. It was a wonderful arrangement. They both enjoyed it. Well, one time they were out somewhere. It was September or August, so it was pretty warm. And so, and in California, so picture that, they very rarely used tents. So picture the old Western where there's a fire and an old guy in a sleeping bag on each side of the fire. And Vernon's waking up, and he's listening for the crackle of the fire, and he doesn't hear that, and he's trying to doesn't smell the bacon and doesn't smell the coffee, and he gradually sort of wakes up and sticks his head up, and he looks over the other side of the dead fire, and Pete still looks like he's out cold in his sleeping bag, and Vernon's thinking, that's just not like Pete. So he goes over to check him, and he walks over, and sure enough, Pete's not asleep. In fact, as Vernon walks up, he looks at Pete. He can see just his face. His eyes are this big. Sweat is running down his forehead. He's completely pale, not shaking, but just like this. Vernon reaches down to shake his shoulder and say, Pete, what's going on? He says, don't touch me. Vernon says, well, why not? He says, 3 hours ago, just like, and it was warm, so they always, during those times, slept with they left their sleeping bag open, so, they could get a little bit of breathe, a little bit of air. He says, 3 hours ago, I woke up and realized there was a rattlesnake in my sleeping bag. I grabbed it. It moved just a little bit, then it stopped, so I'm not even sure where I have it, but I know I can't let go or do anything because I don't know where I have it. I don't know what it will do. And so he said, I need some help. Vernon says, hi. Okay. Vernon's trying to think, how can I help him? And he realizes, okay, the first thing he should do is make Spooky, the black lab, is asleep, at the foot of the sleeping bag. So he thinks it would be really bad for Spooky to see the snake and go after it. So he realizes, okay, I need to get Spooky over the way. Maybe I'll tie her over here, then I can figure out what to do with the snake. So he gently takes Spooky by the collar, and as he takes Spooky, as Spooky leaves, the snake follows Spooky. Because Spooky's tail had slipped into the bed. Pete had woke up and decided it was a snake. He had been holding the dog's tail for 3 hours. The dog's tail took a decade off of Pete's lives. As an addendum to the story, I used to use that story. At the start of every fourth grade year, when I was teaching fourth grade, I'd do some magic tricks. I'd tell the Uncle Pete story with the idea that we're going to be a community in this room, and we should always think about whether we're holding the dog's tail. So when someone says something, when we hear something not sure if they like us and all that. Instead of getting angry or starting a fight or something, we're going to try to figure it out and not hold the dog's tail. And it wasn't real clear to me that that changed the behavior, but at least it got us through the first day of school. Oops.
I love that you took that literally like animal tails. Like, that was good. Well done, Don. Thank you. Up next, we have a storytelling legend here in Burien who has told stories here many times. Gaylloyd Sisson is a regular here, former teacher, a gardener, a poet, and an author. Come on up.
The story is about Pal. Who's Pal? Pal was my first dog. And how did he get that name? Well, the dog is your best friend, so he is my pal. And that's how he got his name. But the thing is, Pal was very American. See, me and Mary, who had a little lamb, and I had a little dog. We had something very similar. We have something very similar. Everywhere that I would go, the dog would surely follow me. And off to school, I went, and as a rule, I saw him following me. And at first I would take rocks and throw him back and tell him, "Go back, pal, go back." And he would go back a few steps and then follow me all the way to school. I don't know how he got home. I love that dog. And this is what happened. I got a sad story. I mean, this story ends sadly, mainly because me and Pal stuck together all the way until I joined the Navy. Yeah, well, Pal was not just my dog, it was the whole family's dog. Everybody fed the dog. He did everything for the dog. And so I didn't worry about Pal. And spent 4 years in the Navy and came home. And they said, "Where's Pal?" Well, Pal was always looking for me, and the dog catchers caught him. And that wasn't the first time they had caught him, but this is the first time my parents didn't go and get him back. That's my story.
That is a sad story, Gaylloyd.
Today.
Thank you. Up next, Kate McPhail, who's part of a storytelling family here in Burien and is also a budding artist. Kate.
So as a child, I was terrified of bears because I knew that bears could eat me. Now, I don't really know why I was afraid of bears. I was a city kid, and the only bears I'd ever seen were in a zoo, and they were in a cage, and I wasn't really afraid of them. But we did a lot of camping, and we almost always went camping at a place called Camp Creek, which is in Oregon on Mount Hood. And there's a lot of woods around that campground. And I was pretty sure there were bears living in that woods, because I knew that bears lived in woods. And so I would always volunteer to sleep in the car. And the reason for that was pretty clever, because I thought anyway, because if a hungry bear came out of the woods, a tent was a lot easier to get into than a locked car. So I would be safe. And with our camping trips, we also did a lot of hiking. And one time we went hiking, and I noticed as we were going up this trail that there was a lot of little caves along the side of the walk there, and bears sleep in caves. So I was a little nervous about those caves, and I asked my dad, "Are there bears in those caves? Because I know bears hibernate in caves." And he said, "Well, bears hibernate in the winter, and it's summer, so we're probably safe." What I didn't know is that our family friends were with us on that hike, and there was a boy there that was about 9, which was 3 years older than me, and he heard that question. So he got a bright idea. So he ran up ahead, and he hopped into one of those caves, and he waited until I came around the corner, and then he jumped out, and he waved his arms, and he growled, and I was halfway down the mountain before my dad caught up with me. Now, to give Jay some credit, he did apologize. However, he giggled so much through the apology, I'm not really sure it was real sincere. Although to give him a little more credit, he's now a minister, so I think maybe he figured it out that he should be nice to people. But so I grew up and I forgot that I was afraid of bears because I didn't ever see any except at the zoo, so I kind of forgot about it. And I lived for a while in Grants Pass, Oregon, which is down in southern Oregon, and I lived on a dairy farm. And from our living room window, we could look out on the cornfield. And it was really, there again, city kid. I loved all the stuff I was learning about country living. And so in the spring, I watched them as they planted the corn in that big field. And then I watched it grow throughout the spring and the summer till it was higher than me, which, needless to say, is not very high, but it was pretty tall. And then it was time for them to harvest the corn. And that was fun to watch because they had this big machine, I think it's called a combine, I don't know, harvester or something. Anyway, that machine would drive down the row and the corn would come flying out this chute into a truck. And then when the truck was full, it would drive away and another truck would take its place. It was fascinating to watch that. And every now and then the harvester would stop and the farmer would get out and he'd fiddle around in the engine. It was an old harvester. And he'd fiddle around the engine and he'd make it go again. And so it was really fun to watch. And then right behind our house, because this was pretty close, it was probably 50 yards maybe from my window, the truck, all of a sudden the harvester stopped. But the farmer didn't get out of it. Instead, he picked up a walkie-talkie and he talked on it and he was quite excited. And I waited to see what was happening, and suddenly two of the workmen came and they had guns. And I thought, I'm a city kid, but I don't think you use guns to harvest corn. Just didn't seem logical. So about that time I look and out walks the biggest bear I've ever seen, because it was up close that time. It was not in a cage. And she just came ambling out, she walked across, and she disappeared into the corn that hadn't been harvested yet. And the hunters followed her. And I started rooting for the bear because she was just in there. She had had babies in the cornfield. She'd been there most of the summer, apparently. And she'd had free food all summer, so she was quite happy until the farmers came along and disrupted her. So then there was a few days that they didn't do any harvesting while they hunted the bear, which they never found. Again, I was cheering for the bear. And then they came back and they finished the harvest and kind of forgot about all the excitement. Until about 3 or 4 days later, I happened to be in my house and I heard some screaming. So I went to the window to see who's screaming. And I see the farmer's wife, who was a little bit on the nutty side most of the time anyway. And she's driving an ATV with one hand, and with her other hand, she's holding her phone up and videotaping because she's chasing that bear with the ATV. And the bear was running all over the place, terrified, came right through my backyard, right past my eyes. And finally, it went off into the woods that was at the other end of the cornfield and disappeared. And we didn't see it again until the next summer when she came back and had 2 more babies in the cornfield. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. So we've now had ducks, we've had a couple dogs, we've had bears. Curious what other animals are coming next. We had an almost rattlesnake. Kind of. We all thought about the rattlesnakes, yeah. Gretchen Douma is an actress and playwright. She and I were in a show together about, like 7 years ago in Seattle. And started telling stories online during the pandemic. And so now she's going to tell one here tonight. So come on up, Gretchen.
If you have a friend who raises dogs, and one day she comes and says to you, oh, you have to come and see the new litter of puppies. One of my bitches had 12. Don't go. And when you go to her house, and you walk in and you see this pile of furry cuteness in a pen in her kitchen, and she says, oh, it's okay, you can climb in the pen and hold the puppies because they need to be socialized. It's really good for them. Don't do it. And when you see the little female puppy and you pick her up and she's the softest thing you've ever held in your life and she smells so good, sure as shit, the next words out of your mouth are, I want her. I had no intention of adopting a dog. I was living in an apartment by myself, and, I didn't, this was crazy. But sure enough, I waited in a certain kind of eager agony for the 3 weeks to follow that made her old enough, 8 weeks old, to bring home. And I learned that raising a dog from a puppy to adulthood is a special kind of agony all its own.
Right.
Now, this little dog was named Seabreeze, Bree for short, and she was an Irish Water Spaniel, which is kind of an unusual breed. The thing about the Irish Water Spaniel is it's an old breed, but not very common in the United States. It was developed in about 1830, and it came about because someone who was running a kennel decided to breed a spaniel with a poodle. Yes, this is, in fact, perhaps the original doodle before doodles became a thing. They are about the size, when full grown, of a standard poodle. They have only one color, chocolate brown, long curly hair, a top knot, and something called a rat tail because their tail has short hair on it. Now, I didn't know anything about this breed, but I knew my friend Lynn, and I'd fallen in love with the puppy, so here I have this very unusual dog. And the only thing I really know about poodles isn't much, because in our family, when we were growing up, we had dogs, Basset Hound, my dad's favorite variety. And to me, poodles were always those fussy dogs. The little teacup ones that were carried around in rich women's purses, and the ones at the dog shows had those ridiculous haircuts, and you'd always see them lounging on their grooming table looking incredibly bored. I was so I did a little research, and it turns out poodles are one of the smartest dogs in the whole lineup of dogs. They are curious, and they're boundless energy, and they're full of enthusiasm for life, and they're a little silly. They're also acutely excellent at sighting birds because they were bred to hunt waterfowl, and they swim. Well, all of those characteristics began to make themselves apparent in my little dog, Bree. And she was a curious and crazy little dog, and she had a unique way of doing anything. And as she got older, that poodle strain seemed to be coming out more and more. For example, when she wanted to come in from outside, instead of scratching or barking at the back door to let me know she wanted to come in, she would jump straight up and down in the air, like she was on the trampoline, until I would see her little brown head coming up into the back door window, and I'd know she wanted to come in. One day, when I was off at work, she managed to knock a roll of paper towel off the kitchen counter, and she spent the entire day shredding it. So that when I came home and looked in my kitchen, it looked like I was raising a giant hamster. She also, that same year, that Christmas, managed to locate a brand new boxed set of paring knives that she decided she wanted to chew the handles on because they were plastic handles. And so when I found her with the box of paring knives and the chewed up handles, I realized in order to do what she'd done, she had to hold the knife blade between her two paws in order to chew. You think she cut her paws at all? There was not a drop of blood in sight. I still, to this day, don't know how she managed it. She was, like I said, creative, inquisitive, and very silly, and a lovely, lovely dog. And I had her till she was about 10. Then there was a stretch of time when I was without dogs, and I moved out here to Seattle, and eventually I met my girlfriend, and I moved in with her, and she had 2 dogs, a gorgeous golden retriever named Shane, and a neurotic but lovable black lab named Jessie. And so I inherited 2 dogs, and Shane was with us until he was 12, and Jessie was about 6 years younger, so we needed to get her another companion because she couldn't be without a buddy, not while we were working full-time. And this time we decided to get a golden doodle because now doodles were starting to come into their own. And so we went to Portland and we picked up this lovely golden doodle. And we named her Jackson after Lauren Jackson, who was the center of the Seattle Storm basketball team at the time and who could jump very high and was big and blonde, and so was this dog going to be.
Right.
And as I watched Jackson grow, I started to see that poodle emerge from her behavior. She had the curiosity and the tenacity and the sense of humor that my dog Burien had. One of the things she did when we first brought her home is she decided to walk cat-like along the back of what was a big sofa in our family room, and then fling herself off the end of the couch like a flying squirrel. She was tiny, and we ran to catch her because we knew she was going to shatter every bone in her body. When she landed unharmed, she gave us a look like, what's with you? What's wrong? Wandered off to another room in the house. And that was her personality all the time. She was a little bit perturbed by the neuroses that Jessie would experience. It would demonstrate from time to time, but not too bothered by her. She also took to housebreaking really fast, which was wonderful because I wanted to teach her how to ring a bell at the back door. Our back door being a sliding glass door that went out to our backyard, the only way to get out of the house. Well, Jackson learned the bell within a couple of days. And I was thinking that maybe Jessie would pick up on it as well. Jessie never figured it out. But Jackson also figured out that, I can ring this bell, and not only when I have to go will they let me out, but if I'm bored, they will let me out. And pretty soon she's ringing that bell incessantly. And I'm realizing, because I know her schedule by now, so you don't need to go outside. So one afternoon I'm in my office, I hear the bell ring, and I know better. And I holler to her from my desk, "Oh, stop it, Jackson, go lie down." And there's quiet. And she moves it again. "Jackson, I know you don't need to go outside. Go lie down." It's quiet. Third time, rings it even harder. I think, okay, maybe I'm wrong. I'll go check. I go to the back door, and there's Jackson seated, and there's Jessie seated right next to her. Then I open a sliding glass door, and Jessie gets up and goes out immediately. And Jackson stands up, gives me a withering look, turns and walks into the living room and lies down for a nap. I'm dumbfounded. Did I just see what I think I just saw? Did she ring the bell for Jessie? I think it's a fluke. And then I'm reminded of the day that Nina and I came home when Jackson was still a puppy. We had left her in a wire crate inside the kitchen, which had been gated off from the rest of the house. And when we got home, Jackson was standing by one of the gates. But the wire crate we had left her in, the door was still locked, just like we had left it when we left in the morning. To this day, we don't know how she managed the Houdini-like escape. But from then on, we left the crate door open because we didn't want her getting caught if she was going to try it again. And as that flashes through my mind, and I'm thinking about what I've just seen, I'm thinking, okay, fluke? I don't know. Well, turns out she does it again, rings the bell. And again, and again, and again. For the entire rest of Jessie's life, Jackson rings the bell for her so she can go outside. Jessie never learns how to do it, but then why should she bother? She's got an older sister who's doing it for her. Which caused me to reassess again my understanding of dogs, and specifically to apologize to every poodle that I have ever mentally insulted. Because that poodle strain, as it came through that Irish Water Spaniel, and as it came through that Golden Doodle, has just been a miraculous thing to see. The mind working, the way they dream at night, when they bark when they're sleeping, and love it all. And I'm convinced that Jackson was, in fact, the smartest dog we've ever owned. Until we got Tenny, the miniature Australian Labradoodle. But that's another story.
I love the way you started that, Gretchen. And I can say, as somebody who has 3 dogs at home, I could have learned something from that. Like, just don't go, and then you won't end up with more dogs. I also have the problem, like, children always want more animals. So we have 3 cats, too, and a bearded dragon. If anyone's interested in the bearded dragon, let me know. Butterscotch is her name. They're all food names. Eric Mathison is up next. Eric is part of our steering committee, and and has been involved with Seven Stories pretty much the whole time. And he's also been in Burien a long time. So Eric, come on up.
Well, dogs love doggy daycare, socializing with other dogs, roughhousing, playing, chasing. Our dog, Otto, hated doggy daycare. So that's why he ran away, slipped out of his leash and collar with all his ID when we were in the parking lot of a doggy daycare facility just down on Ambom. So he ran into Ambom and started dodging cars all around like that. And this Good Samaritan tried to help me to call him back. But then that was just, just another thing for him to be afraid of. So he just ran back out, dodging cars. Finally, I decided, go on. I'd rather see you lost than get hit by a car. And I figured, so he ran down 152nd. I thought, well, the first restaurant he comes to and gets these smells, he'll run right in, so it'll be easy to find. But, I drove down 152nd, didn't see him. And then, at what was then an informal dog park, and now is actually a formal dog park, I saw Rob Johnson, who was a local Burien character, with two dogs, a black dog and a white dog. I said, that white dog, that's Otto. So I leapt out, but they were both Rob's dogs. The black dog, Romeo, and the other white dog, who was named something like Fido. I don't know why that dog wasn't named Juliet, but and so then for like the next hour, I tried to think like a dog, and where would I go if I was running away? And I did all the usual things that you do to find a dog. And finally, I had to do that dreaded thing. Honey, I lost the dog. And so we decided to hire a dog to find another dog and track other dogs that are lost. And so Marge and I spent the next 2 hours trying to follow this dog and this trainer as they raced through all these backyards following Otto's scent. And it was getting dark. It was kind of twilight. It was getting dark. So I was afraid that we would get shot by some homeowner, nervous homeowner. But after 2 long loops between downtown Burien and the Sears neighborhood, the tracking dog just collapsed right on my foot. He was heavy, but he couldn't go any further. So Marge and I had to get used to the idea that our dog was going to spend a night, I'm getting emotional about this, outside in the cold, and we were going to try to sleep, knowing that we may never see our dog again. So Marge went home, and I drove north to put up some more flyers, and my cell phone rings. Hello, Mr. Mathison. This is the Acme Pet Chip Services Company. A dog with an embedded chip that's registered to you has been taken to Five Corners Animal Clinic.
Bye.
Thank you, I cried. And I U-turned and roared into that parking lot, and I saw across the parking lot Otto being led into some strange woman's car. I'd lost Otto once that day, and now I was going to lose him again. So I jumped out of my car, and I ran over there, and I said, about as rudely as I could say, "Excuse me, but that's my dog." And the way that Otto was going crazy, sick when he saw me, and it was hard for the woman to argue. And it turned out that the woman was the nice lady that had found Otto outside in the bushes, outside the building that she had been cleaning, and brought him to the clinic. And so she gave the dog over to me, and then I had not called Marge. I had not called Marge after I got the call from the pet shop company. And so I thought, I will really surprise her, you know. And I really formulated just exactly how I would surprise her, whether, you know, I would leave the dog in the car and, you know, and go in and we'd commiserate, and then go out and get the dog, or whether, you know, I just should hear the car come in and, we're going to have a miserable night. And, you know, and I'd let the dog in first, but the pet shop company had called her too, so it wasn't a surprise. So, but we had a glorious reunion that night. Thank you.
I once let my neighbor take my dogs on a walk, and she lost both dogs. But I did get phone calls from the people who found them, so that was nice. Our last animal tale tonight, can you believe we've already gotten to the end? Kind of crazy. Is from Stephen Scheurich. Stephen hosts the radio show The Other Side Chronicles, and he's lived in the area for 14 years. So come on up, Stephen.
Hey, everybody. All right, let me set the scene. July day in the hill country of South Texas. If you've ever been to South Texas in July, you got a pretty good idea of what the temperature was like. So, you know, 100 plus. I'm sitting at my desk with my feet up with a fan oscillating back and forth, thinking about where I'm going to have my next margarita. It had been a long week, a really long week. But this particular Friday had been pretty chill, which was, you know, a little different in the workplace that So let me back up a little bit and tell you what I did and tell you about my job, and you can kind of understand a little bit of the stress levels that happened where I worked. I was the assistant director, which meant I ran the show for the largest wildlife rehab center in the United States. So we did over 2,000 rescues, rehabilitations, and releases every year. Not only did we do rescue indigenous wildlife, but we also was a sanctuary for over 400 exotic animals. And a lot of these animals came, a lot of them came from the exotic pet trade, which Texas is known for. They're one of the few states that still allows you to buy a baby tiger or a chimpanzee. As insane as that sounds, it is one of the few states that still allow that. So we also had animals from labs. So we rescued primates from labs. We had animals like, I think we had the retired Baylor bear there. And it was an amazing sanctuary for these animals. The enclosures that we built for them most of them were better than any zoo that you would see. Beautiful, you know, large enclosures with trees. We tried to give these animals that had been abused and had been through a lot of terrible things, the very best place they could be to live out the rest of their lives. So as you can imagine, it was an exciting place to work. I had a small staff. We had a fully functional veterinary clinic with a veterinarian on staff and a small staff. But most of my staff was built with interns. So as you can imagine, we had a lot of college students that would come from all over the country because they had a chance to work with animals that most of the time they would not get a chance to work in. So if they were like vet students or biologists, wildlife biology majors, they would get to come and they could work with not only the indigenous wildlife, but they could work with primates, they could work with big cats, with a lot of different species that, they would. So it was a very interesting place to come and work if you were an intern. But at the same time, since a lot of my staff was built with interns, it was also not a lot of them having a lot of experience, so they got thrown into the fire pretty fast. So this particular day, it was the end of the day. I was imagining myself getting in my car, driving home, having a nice quiet weekend. Like I said, I had a margarita on my mind. And as I'd shut down my computer, I'd been working on budgets all day, and I had just got up to start out the door, and my two-way radio went off. That if you've ever been to that you hear that first kind of that noise that they make, and it's like, please no, please no, 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 no. And it's Tim, and Tim is my right-hand person. He's the guy that he's got so much experience, he could literally do a surgery. He's not a vet, but he could do a surgery if he had to. He knows how to deal with different kinds of animals, whether it's a hawk, an eagle, a wolf, or a mountain lion. He knows all about having, how to deal with all these. So I get this message from Tim on the radio. It says, "Hey, have you left the property yet?" Believe me, I wanted to not answer the radio, but I said, "Yes, I'm still on the property." He said, "We have a couple of capuchins on the loose." I don't know if you know what a capuchin is. So if you don't know what a capuchin is, the best way to describe a capuchin, a couple people always say, Raiders of the Lost Ark eats the fig, drops over, that's a capuchin. The old grinder monkey that would do the dancing, some of you us old people that remembers that's a capuchin. They're super sweet, ornery, very ornery. A limb had fallen into one of the enclosures, got a hole, a couple of them had got out. Tim says, "Hey, I'm grabbing one of the dart guns, I'll meet you down there, I just need a little backup, I could probably handle it, but come on down." I said, "Fine." So yes, we had dart guns, and Tim was an expert shot, and he used depending on the size of the animal, so if it was a bear, mountain lion, we also literally had tigers, African lions, and you say, how would you get those? Well, say a drug dealer wants to have a African lion, he buys a baby African lion, he puts it in his mansion in South Texas, and then it bites him, or his house gets raided, and they call us, and we come and pick up the African lion. So we have all these animals there. So different size darts, right, for different size animals, a little bitty tiny dart with a little bit of meds for a capuchin, a bigger dart, for an African lion. Makes sense. So I also grab out of the locker, I went ahead and grabbed my dart rifle just in case. Not gonna need it, it's just a capuchin, no big deal. But I grab it, I walk out, I get in the gator, which is like a four-wheeler, like an ATV with like a little pickup bed on the back. That's all we use to take food around to the sanctuary. And I get in and I start heading down the hill, heading for the capuchin enclosure. So also, every intern has radios on them, and they have this little button that's an emergency button that they press that makes this little noise. It's just a little beeping noise. That way, if they can't talk, they can press this, and I start hearing this beeping noise coming across my two-way radio, and I'm thinking, is this Tim accidentally hitting that? Everyone should be everything should be closing up for the night. And as I'm driving down the hill, I look and I see the mountain lion enclosure. We have 4 mountain lions in a 5-acre enclosure. 3 of the mountain lions, and I know this sounds terrible, but it's true, people would declaw them and defang them, and because they didn't want to get bit or scratched by their pet mountain lion. But we had one full, I know, it's crazy, right? So we had one male that was fully intact, had all his claws, he had his canines, had it all. And I look, and I think my eyes are deceiving me, but there is an intern outside the mountain lion enclosure, backed up with her back to the back of the cage with this full male. This is how big he is, with his paws up on her shoulders, looking her straight in the eyes, outside. And I'm looking at this, and I'm like, oh my God. And I'm like driving, and I'm grabbing my dart gun, and as the mountain lion sees me coming down the hill, he turns around, he lets go of her and runs back into his enclosure. So how this happened, I'll just do a quick, how this happened is we have what's called lockouts. And when they feed them, so they go into the lockout, which is a separate little area inside the big enclosure, and they put the food, whether it's raw chicken or whatever they're feeding them. So they go in, and then when they go back out, they pull the little trap door, and it allows the mountain lions to come back in. And as you can imagine, the mountain lions come to get their food. Well, she had made almost a fatal mistake, and she got confused and hit the wrong lever, and as she went back out to the gator, the mountain lion just followed her right outside and was there to greet her. By the time I got there and I shut the gate to keep the mountain lion back in, she was just still standing there looking straight, as white as a sheet, going, mountain lion, mountain lion, mountain lion, mountain lion. And I'm like, it's okay, it's me, mountain lion, mountain lion, mountain lion. 3 days later, she was back to Indiana. I don't think I think she's okay, but I never, that was the end of her. Hopefully, she continued to be part of doing good work with wildlife, but that was the last time I saw her. So, okay, back to capuchins. Got the mountain lions in. So by the time I got to the capuchin enclosure, 2 of the capuchins were back in. We still had 1 of the little devils loose, and Tim had fixed the enclosure where the rest of them were going to get out. And literally, as I'm pulling up, I see Tim dart the 3rd one. And so with the drugs that you use for wild animals, when the dart in the medicine goes into them, they don't immediately just go boom, right? It takes a little bit of time for the meds to work. So obviously it hurts, it's a needle, and the capuchin screams, or whatever animal you're darting will run a bit before they finally, fall over. So the capuchin takes off running as fast as capuchins could run, and yes, it could have just got up in a tree and laid down. He could have just laid on the ground, nice and sweet, where I could come and pick him up, but no. He decides to run up to jump onto another enclosure, go to the very top of this enclosure and lay down and go to sleep. Sounds great, right? Except this enclosure was filled with a certain species of macaque. Now, I'm going to explain to you what a macaque is. So macaques are one of the largest of the monkeys. They look a lot like a baboon in a lot of ways. There's a whole bunch of different kinds of macaques. So just saying macaque is so a lot of people have seen the photos of the Japanese snow monkeys in the hot springs. That's a macaque. They tend to have a kind of a red face and kind of a red butt. Sorry for that description. But the sad thing about macaques is they're probably the primate that's used the most in labs. And the reason they're used the most in labs is because they're hard to kill. They're so tough that you can just about do anything to them, and they stay alive. So a lot of the macaques that we had there were rescued from labs. They lived in these amazing enclosures. It's one of the best works I've ever done in my life, is giving these primates a second chance, giving them, it was just a beautiful thing to see. But as you can imagine, macaques that had been in labs didn't like humans very much. Understandably, weren't big on us, and totally got that. We let them alone, we let them have their lives. So this little capuchin goes up on top of this enclosure with a certain kind of macaque and they have big canines, these macaques do. So my first, I was like, oh my God, this capuchin's gonna get ripped to shreds. They're gonna pull him through the enclosure, and I'm like, I start climbing the enclosure. On the outside of the enclosure, I look at Tim, who's there with me. I said, get a bigger dart in, get the meds in. There was this one particular macaque that he just didn't like me. I would walk by and he would just give me this look like, if I ever get my hands on you, he would look at me like that, if I ever get my hands on you. And so I'm like, if Buck, I called him Buck, if Buck starts coming after me or the capuchin, dart him. And Tim goes, all right, I got it. So I start climbing up and the macaques are going nuts. They're going crazy. And if you've ever been around a bigger primate, when a group of them are kind of losing their minds, it's pretty scary. It can be pretty scary. So I'm climbing up to go get this sweet little capuchin and put him in my arms, and it's not the easiest climb either, but I'm just about there, and here comes Buck after me, and Tim gets his rifle and aims it at Buck and fires, and there's one little tiny branch that's going across in his sight line, and it just happens to tick that branch, and the dart hits me right in the calf. Yeah, hits me in the calf. So I had, believe me, from that moment on, I had a great respect for any animal that got darted because it hurt. Now, it's not a big enough dose to knock a full-size human down, but I did feel it, and so I have this dart. Obviously, Buck's not darted. He's coming up after me. I've got this capuchin, and as I'm climbing down, I look at Tim, who I expect to be reloading, and he's laying on the ground laughing so hard. I'm like, are you kidding me? And he is laughing, rolling. He thinks it's the funniest thing he's ever seen. Anyway, I was able to get the capuchin down, took the capuchin to the clinic. He recovered fine. We got him back into his closure, and Tim and I were able to have that margarita.
Well, that's a story, Stephen. That's a good one. Thank you. So that's it for tonight. I want to thank you so much for coming to 7 Stories. Remember, next month we'll be here again. So April 25th, more animal tales, as well as hidden truths. And then on May 23rd, first time is the theme. So check that out. If you are able to give us a donation, it helps us pay the museum for the space. So thank you for that. And thanks again for coming. Have a good night.